Hi, I'm Brian. Welcome to Autogefühl and welcome to Lisbon, Portugal, where we have come to give you a very exclusive behind-the-scenes look at the brand new Audi A3 Sportback. 1996 is when the A3 first exploded into Audi's lineup, and this is now its fourth generation. Since the mid-90s, it's sold 5 million units. So to say that this is an important revision to Audi's lineup might be a little bit of an understatement. Well, you always have to be careful when you're redesigning something that's popular. You don't, of course, want to throw out the things that make the car popular, but you do have to be offering something significantly new and different in order to keep those new customers coming in. So, just how have Audi got on with that challenge? We will be taking a full look at the exterior of the car, the interior of the car, showing you how some of that new tech that, of course, the car is coming with has been integrated within the car's design, and, of course, giving you our first thoughts. So, come with us and let's take a closer look. 1.82 m or 6 feet in width, there is a lot to talk about in the new front of the A3. In case you're thinking it already looks that much more dynamic as it sits here, I should tell you that it is now 3 centimeters, and I guess that's just a little over an inch, so about that much wider than its predecessor. And you can already see right from the first glance how that relates to the design language. Now, there are 3 exterior trim levels available for this car. That's the base, the advanced, and the S-line. What you are looking at here is the advanced trim level. And the way that that distinguishes itself from the other available options are that we have a chrome surround for this large front grille, and we also have chrome details elsewhere on the lights, but we'll come on to those in a bit more detail in a minute. If you go with the base, you're going to get a matte black surround that matches this grille, and if you go with the S-line, then you get what they've described as platinum design features. So a little bit duller, but more metallic feeling than what you can see here. Well, the first things to mention about the changed front of this car are really about the increased dynamism and the angularity that you now get. Now, at first glance, you might not realize quite what a big departure this is from what's gone before, but there's an awful lot of design happening here. And to take a really closer look as to how that impacts on the overall aesthetic, I think the best place to look is going to be the lighting clusters. When approaching the design of the new A3, Audi really wanted to emphasize its sporty elements, and you can really see that here in the redesigned front light grille. Now, standard across all lines, you will get LED headlamps, but if you want this, and this is full matrix LED, it is available as an option. Now, a lot of times manufacturers will just use that as a fancy term for lights that are a bit more adaptable, but that really has been incorporated into the design here. Depending on which of the design lines you go with, the front light signature will actually be completely different within this segment here. So if you're really enthusiastic about styling, that's something worth paying attention to. Slightly further down, well, again, you can see that it's an advanced feature that you have this chrome effect around what are solid air intake points. Now, if you go with the S-line, that's even more sporty, and there you have a lot wider of an air diffuser effect here, and a lot more understated platinum effect round at the side here. All of these features add up to give you a much more sporty, much more aggressive front appearance of this car. And if that carries through to the side, well, it's going to make for a very dynamic appearance indeed. 4.34 m or 14 feet and 2 inches is what the new A3 comes in at. And just for nice similarity, that is about 3 centimeters longer than the predecessor, or the same addition as the width, but the difference being, whereas with the width, you can notice that in the interior of the car for the length, that's all about the crash protection provided at the front, so no change to the dynamic room inside the car. Now, For my taste, the side is where the A3 really starts getting interesting. And the reason for that is partly due to its massive popularity. Because this car has been so successful with such a wide cross-section of customers, the redesign of it needs to speak to a very wide variety of different needs, and you can see that heavily reflected in the design. What do I mean by that? Well, for some customers, this is going to represent a sporty, agile, small car. For other customers, this is going to represent a smaller version of a large car. Sound contradictory? Well, it is a little bit, and you can understand the impact that's had on the visual aesthetic here. So I can see all kinds of nice design elements that tie into Audis that have gone before, and some futuristic new ones as well. Take a look, for example, at this roof rail here. So that is very evocative of the Avant styling. But if I come lower down the flank, look at this chiseled mark in the lower third of the door here. Now, to me, that's very reminiscent of the Q2, but don't worry, we're going to speak to the man responsible for the design of this in a minute, who's going to tell me that that's all wrong. What I want really to draw your attention to before we talk to him is just how many things there are happening visually in the side flank of this car. There are so many different visual levels to look at, with all of these design characteristics drawing your eye to different places. And the reason I find that personally so impressive is that it means that this car can be what you personally want it to be. If you want to interact with this as a sporty, stylish, dynamic, small car, well, you can interpret it that way visually. If you want to see the size and the space, these lines give you that freedom to do that as well. Now, of course, I'm not going to be able to talk to you about the side aesthetic of this car without mentioning these wheels right here. Now, for those very keen-eyed viewers who like to make an assessment before they're told, I'll give you just a second to tell me what size you think these are. 19 inches. So it won't come as a huge surprise to you to learn that they are not standard. Standardly, if you go with the base model or the advanced line for exterior, you're going to be getting 16-inch wheels. If you go to the S line, that's 17-inch. But these 19 inches, well, they are provided by Audi Sport, and they are going to cost you an extra €3,000. So, if you like them, you're going to need to pay. 1.43 m or 4'7" is the height of the new A3, which is exactly the same as the outgoing model. But there are a couple of things to pay attention to, and that's down here. There are 3 different suspensions to choose from. The base, or you can go with a sport suspension, and that drops the ride height of the car by 15 millimeters, or there's adaptive suspension, and that drops the ride height of the car by 10 millimeters. So, depending on how low you want to go, the choice is yours. Let's talk about the rear of the new A3. Well, here again we have to talk about the difference of options that are available on the back of this car. If you're going with the base model, you're going to notice that mostly in the lower part here, and this will just be a matte black finish. This is the advanced trim level, so here we have this chrome effect. If you go up to the S line, you will get a custom air diffuser on the back and more of that platinum, so really dark matte chrome effect at the bottom. Other than that, everything's going to look pretty familiar. And I have to say, if I had to sum up the back of this car, I'm going to go with very clean. Really, there's a lot happening in the front and side here. So I think the main feeling with the back is to make sure it finishes off in an elegant, non-confrontational manner. You've got lots of different levels happening here visually that make the rear of this car seem as small as you would want it to be. This is not a huge car, but again, it is not a small car. So visually, you have to be presented with enough that's interesting to look at, from the spoiler up here, right down to this nice boot line and the bumper at the bottom. So, it's not making the biggest statement in the world, but I think that's probably a good thing. It's really perfectly pleasant and does still continue that theme of dynamism and sportiness that the rest of the car has promised. So what happens when we open it up? Well, let's take a closer look. As you would expect, there are also lots of exciting things to be discovered in the engine compartment of this car. But let's have a look at this one and see what it's harboring. Well, there we are. At market launch, you can have your choice of 3 different engines. What you're currently looking at is the 1.5-litre TFSI producing 150 horsepower, and that's been combined with a 6-speed manual gearbox. You can also pick from one of two 2-litre TDI engines, producing either 116 or 150 horsepower. The least powerful of those comes with the 6-speed manual, and the most powerful comes with a 7-speed S-tronic gearbox. But 2 weeks after launch or thereabouts, you should also be able to get a 3-cylinder 1-litre TFSI producing 110 horsepower, or, and this is the exciting one, a 1.5-litre TFSI. We already talked about that, but this time combined as a mild hybrid with a 48-volt system and a 7-speed S-tronic gearbox. Now, that promises to deliver a fuel efficiency of around about 0.4 litres for every 100 kilometres that you drive. And that's largely in part because it can recuperate up to 12 kilowatts of power. And it can glide for 40 full seconds with the engine completely off. So, hybrids are all about where Audi is heading to with the new A3. So that's just what's going to be available closely after launch. But plug-in hybrid models are going to be following hot on the heels. That's their approach to how they can best produce dynamic performance from the engine lineup that they have heavily modified for this car. What do I mean by that? Well, you may have been thinking in terms previously of the 1.6-litre engine. You're now going to be able to get that kind of power out of these 1.5-litre engines. So, more efficient, more power, and most important of all, hopefully where you live, less tax. Let's take a closer look in the boot. Well, if you remember me mentioning from earlier, the additional 3 centimeters in length has all been absorbed within the crash protection at the front. So what you're looking at is 380 litres of load space, which is exactly the same number that the previous A3 had. As you can see, we've got a drop floor here that allows you either an extra bit of discrete storage or just a little bit more room to fit your slightly larger items in the back. That comes in pretty handy, and then when you want to load it, you can reduce the amount of entry level to get your things in. Now, of course, all of these rear seats fold down, and if you do that, there we go. I'll come right the way around the back of Thomas so we can get to the rest of it. And you can see they almost fold flat, and that gives us up to 1,200 litres of load in the rear of this car. And again, that's exactly the same as the previous A3. Once you get inside the new A3, there are 3 different trim levels to choose from. There's the base, there's the design line, and there's also the S line, which you are looking at right now. But I think it's worth pointing out that the seats which Thomas is showing you are special sport seats, so these are an optional extra. But they're not insanely expensive. You can get these for around about €350 extra. We're going to sit in them in a minute and find out if they're worth spending that money on. But I do think it's well worth pointing out before we get to that point that these seats are a mix of Alcantara in the middle and fake leather on the outside. So well done, Audi, for providing us with a sustainable option. If you want to go for the standard seating, I'm really happy to tell you that they're now being made out of recycled bottles, believe it or not. It takes 45 to make one seat, but then you can drive around feeling pretty happy about your sustainable credentials the whole time you're in it. And don't forget, if you go with one of the mild hybrids, you're going to be able to feel even more happy about it. Now, the bit that everyone's been waiting for. If you are a fan of the outgoing A3, or you just have lots of experience of driving around in one, you will be aware that there were quite a lot of design cues in that, which people either fell in love with, or maybe not so much. So a lot has happened on the interior of this car, and we're going to take a look in much closer detail. But for now, I think you can pick up an awful lot of those design cues just by looking at this door. Look how much design has gone into this. This handle, for example, that, to me, I think is a completely original approach. Look at all the angularity in this design and look at all of this mixed material usage here. There's clearly a massive amount of attention that's been paid here. I think what Audi is saying is they really want you to know, first of all, this is a significant departure from what's gone before, but also it's very particular and very styled. So from the moment you open the door on the car, you should know it's an A3. Now, obviously, when you make a bold style statement, that's not going to sit brilliantly with everyone. So I am very interested to hear what your immediate reaction to this is. Are you looking at this and thinking, yes, that's great? Or are you watching this and thinking, oh, I don't know, maybe that's too much of a departure from what happened before? Write in the comments and let us know. But before then, let's take a seat in and see if that sports seat's worth paying the extra for. Well, clearly we're not going to be able to get a full impression of that until we take it out for a drive. But I can tell you, sitting here in a stationary position, it's very comfortable indeed. And the seat position in this car works with a memory setting, so you will be able to have that set up exactly the way you like it. Now, I'm 5'10" or 178 centimeters, but I do have a very long torso. So if you're looking at me and comparing for height, basically, if you're around about 6 foot or 6'1", this is the reasonable amount of space that you can get from your A3. And as you can see from my head, there's stacks of room in here. I have more than enough space to feel completely comfortable. So, driving position, really nice on the road. I sit just over the bonnet. I'm low down into the car, so my center of gravity feels good. It feels dynamic and sporty, exactly what the exterior promised me. But does that feeling follow the rest of the interior design? Let's take a closer look and find out. Well, once you start looking around the A3, my goodness, you certainly notice just how much has changed in here. If you haven't seen a previous A3, then you will have missed out on the rather obtrusive display right over the top of the dashboard. So Audi have made huge steps in terms of integrating their digital systems. As you can see, there is now a digital cockpit built straight into here, and then matching that, a digital infotainment system. Now, this is 10.1 inches from side to side, and that comes as standard right throughout every single model that you can buy on the market. This is the largest that's available, and it's 12.3 inches, but if you want to go with a smaller one, they do go down to around about 10 inches in diameter. So there is a little bit of variation here, but it shouldn't interfere with what you see in terms of the design aesthetic. Everything is much more subtle and integrated than the previous car. I think there's been a huge amount of design attention paid here to making sure that whilst you still have these very distinctive stylistic features to tell you that the car has its own unique qualities, everything is much more conservative, putting your focus and attention where you want it to be, and that obviously is right on the road in front. Now, this car in particular is loaded with optional extras, so as you can see, or you may be able to see, you can now get a head-up display baked in as well, but that is not standard. That's an option if you want to go for it. Steering wheel, well, if we're going to give credit to Audi for using recycled bottles and special new Alcantara seats, we have to give them a little bit of criticism for saying it would have been nice if we'd found something alternative to the leather-wrapped steering wheel, and that is continued as well on the gear stick mount. So it'd be nice to see some more materials coming through here as well. But in terms of how the new multifunction steering wheel sits within the car, I think you will agree it looks pretty great, and being Audi, its functionality is very straightforward and easy to use. Now, as far as the driver's systems in this car go and their integration with the infotainment system, this car has 10 times the processing power of its predecessor. So all of the systems on board are that much more slick in their application. That said, as with almost every other car, deciding what you can adjust, how you can adjust it, and where you can adjust it is always going to be just a little bit of fun. So this is a touch sensitive screen. If I go to the home, I can give you a sense of how the navigation system's working, but you can see just how fluid it is. That extra power really makes an awful lot of difference in terms of how you can interact with a car. If I want to change my driver settings, if I do that through here, you can get a sense immediately of what some of those features are. So let's go to the cockpit, and you can see we have 3 standard design layouts to choose from. Classic, and if I change that, you can see, is not radically different to the Sport, which is available here. Challenge you to immediately notice the difference. But if you want something that's radically different, well, tell me what you think about that. Now, having settled on one of the first 2 options, as I suspect most people will, if you want to change the way in which the information on the digital cockpit is displayed, that happens over here on the multifunction steering wheel. We press the view, we can change between having large or smaller dials, and as you will know from previous Audis, we can have all kinds of different information displayed in the center. Again, thanks to that heightened processing power, everything works really seamlessly, and it's really nice. Now, I think it's a feature worth pointing out over here back on the infotainment system again, that if I want to, I can program this to be set up and ready for multiple different users. So up to 6 different users, and I think that's a really great feature. That said, I would obviously be an even bigger fan if they allowed me to make sure that the setup of the screen was the way I like it. It's just one of those things that people interfere with. But the heating and cooling function is great. And talking of heating and cooling, let's have a look down here. Now, this is one of the most hotly contested areas of interior design that you can possibly think of. How to integrate heating and cooling controls. After wringing their hands and arguing about it for months, Audi decided that buttons was still what people want. And I have to tell you, I agree with them. I really like the way these have been integrated, so you don't have to look at those features when you're not using them. Turn them on, turn them off. And as you can see, if you push any one of the control buttons, it will instantly turn them on. So when you're driving and enjoying your car, you don't need to think about it. You can access what you need to immediately. So hats off for that. Not so much in the way of hats off for the volume control on the stereo. Well, obviously that is a feature you can access through the multifunction steering wheel. If you don't want to do that, you can also talk to your car to give it instruction. But if you want to go old school, well, there's a slightly different method available for that. Coming slightly further down, we can see the Drive Select feature. This is the only place on which you can change the driving modes. That will adjust the steering, the handling, and the suspension. So, a useful button to know the whereabouts of. I don't know if I would have liked it a little bit more prominently placed, but it's actually pretty easy to access from the gear stick. Further down, and welcome to mobile phone world. Well, if you're big on connectivity, I think it's well worth mentioning that at launch, this car will still require a wired connection for a mobile phone if you want to use features like Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. But give it a month or so, and that should be something that can be done wirelessly. So if that's a big feature for you, it might just be worth waiting a little bit longer. In addition to which, if you can just about make out down there, I have 2 USB charge points. At the moment, that is a USB standard and a USB-C. Again, very shortly after launch, you will find that changing to 2 USB-C points. So I don't know how important that is to you, but it is probably worth you knowing about. Then there is a nicely raked ledge, and I like the way that they've thought to do this. A lot of manufacturers just compromise on the space that they have available to put a mobile phone charge point in. This is inductive charging, so you can lay your phone down there and it will sit nice and safe for you, and it provides enough space for one of the bigger phones as well. So I think that's made a really good use of the space that's available. Now we come on to one of my less favorite features. This is, believe it or not, the audio controls. Now you can access this through the steering wheel. Those of you who are regular viewers will know I'm a big fan of old and analog. This is new and digital. As you can see, it doesn't have a lot in the way of surface area to interact with. The best description I've heard of this so far is it has most in common with a first generation iPod. So you can turn the volume up and down in much the same way you'd be familiar with. Now, I guess the reason for my negative reaction to this is, as a driver, that just doesn't work for me, not least if I want to use it. As I found out earlier, this is precariously close to touching your passenger's knee, and that is not a territory that most of us want to get into. So I think the driver is really going to be limited to using those steering wheel controls. All of that said, it is really nice to see the passenger thought of, and obviously this is very well placed for them to be able to use. So, chances are, if you're looking at this as a passenger, you will be doing it rather a lot more favourably than I am as a driver. If there's one thing you really can say about Audi, it's that they usually put as much attention into the backseat passengers as they do into the front. And even just a first glance at the rear of this car tells you that this car is no exception to that. So, as much of the design taking place in the rear door, a really nice wide open angle to make ease of access a reality. And it looks to me as if there is plenty of room back here. Well, there you go. Again, if you're comparing me at around about 6 foot, 6'1", you can see I have plenty of available headspace here. Now, the seat's quite far forwards because it's adjusted for me, but even taking that into account, absolutely masses of legroom back here. Now, it's also worth mentioning that although we never gained the benefit of that additional 3 centimeters in length at the front, you really do notice it for width. So there's much more available shoulder width than there is in the predecessor. Now, I know 3 centimeters is not a whole lot of room, but the impact upon your comfort as a rear seat passenger is immediate and noticeable. Back here, the attention to detail and the quality of materials is everything that you would expect from the front. It's really nicely finished. And there are options available for rear seat passengers too. There are 2 USB-C charge points down here, but I do think it's worth pointing out that, like many other things, those are an option. So you can rack up those bills in the configurator pretty briskly, but at least they are available to choose if that's what you're after. We've been joined by Philip Romers, and he is the man responsible for the exterior design of the new A3. Now, Philip, the first thing I have to say to you is, a car that's sold 50 million units, that's got to make you a little nervous when you're addressing a redesign.
Yeah, I have to say the A3 is a quite popular product, and it was the first car which was a premium compact car at this time. And still, the current A3 is a quite good product itself. It offers a lot of good functionality, the cabin is big enough, it drives very well, has a nice interior, but we thought there's time to improve. And actually what were the main topics were actually to make the car more sporty and more striking. So we had to create a quite bold, characterful design.
So how do you do that without alienating the customers who like the design already?
No, actually for us it was important that you can clearly see it's still an A3, but you also have to see it's the next A3, it's a new generation. And actually what we did is the second and also the third generation Sportback of the A3 was always supposed to be a shortened Avant. And we said this time we want to change a little bit the character. We wanted to do the car more like a sporty hot hatch. So we shortened at least a little bit the rear overhang and made the seat post more prominent. And this gives the car a new proportion, which is very well balanced because the front overhang is slightly longer, the rear overhang is a little bit shorter. This gives a lot of tension in the side profile, and this makes the car already quite sporty from the proportion. And then what I was talking about was a striking body side theme, and I think we found something very characterful. Actually, as you can see here, we have a shoulder which is running around the whole car, which is very prominent. This is for us also a little bit the link to the first generation A3. Also the first generation had a shoulder running around the whole car. This made the car look like a premium car also. But this shoulder was quite soft. And this time we said, of course, we have to make it very striking, very, very sharp. And then there comes a rule break. Actually, this surface here is almost negative. And normally this is a no-go in the automotive design industry because the car is not standing well on the wheels. But we thought we use the quattro elements on top of all four wheels to give the car the proper stance. And the A3 is available also as a quattro, so it makes totally sense also on the A3 to emphasize our quattro technology. Yeah, and in general, I would say this is a very striking and characterful body side theme, which is extremely three-dimensional, and I'm looking forward to see it outside moving, because I think this will look quite interesting outside.
One of the interesting things to me in particular about the way that the design aesthetic plays with the overall appearance of the car, as you say, that negative space, but in particular the way that the light interplays with it. It creates levels in the visual aesthetic that you're just not used to seeing in the way that the car presents. And that throws you slightly emotionally. You're not quite sure how to interact with it, but it gives you a little extra dynamism. And you think, oh, I don't know what this is, but I think I'm going to like it.
Yeah, that's the point. Yeah.
So come on.
I think it's a good combination between really this shoulder, this really says premium, I'm a premium compact car, but this modulation here in the lower part really makes it then very characterful in the same time and very sporty.
So you spent many hours working on this car, and as we all know, the design of anything connected to a vehicle is always a compromise between what you ideally want and what you have to compromise on because of regulations or brand requirements. What features did you really fight for here that you're really excited about and you really love, you're really proud of?
Yeah, actually I can tell you, I think the body side is so extreme because this point is so far in, and this was quite also for our engineers quite a tough topic to make this work, because of course there are all the barrels inside. We wanted to offer also interior space in the same time, and we created this very extreme section. So this is actually what I like most about the new A3.
I have to ask you, and I know it's going to be a silly question, but when I look at the rear profile of that, there's something very reminiscent. If I say the chisel line on the Q2, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is there any reference that, I know it's different, it's very different in styling, but is there any similar reference point in terms of keeping the consistency throughout the brand?
No, but both are Audi design, of course, and I have to say also the Q2 is a quite characterful car. And so to see features like this, which give a lot of character to a car, why not? It's an Audi.
Well, I think that more or less says it all. So come on, I'm going to need you to be honest with me. I've always asked this of designers. Which size of wheel do we have to have for this car?
19.
Ah, come on. Well, there you go. You can't argue with the man that designed it. So send him the bill. Maybe he's going to help you out with that a little bit. But I can only say congratulations. I think what you've achieved here is really, really difficult because it gives something so new and so fresh visually to the appearance and the aesthetic, but it's still an A3. And I think this
was a task.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, that about does it for us from our sneak peek behind the scenes at the brand new A3 Sportback. So, what about pricing? Well, if you're looking at base models, they start at 26,800. This is for Germany, and they go up to around about 34,900. That's entry price depending on trim level. Of course, once you start adding options and you start looking at the different things available, that price can go up pretty briskly from there. But I think it's fair to say you can get more or less what you want if you factor in around about an extra 5,000's worth of spend. Clearly, 3,000 just for wheels is not going to be everybody's order of business. But you know, it absolutely will be some people's, so it's nice that they're there. On the other hand, do you really like Matrix LED enough to justify 1,500 spend on them? Well, some people will. They are, after all, a very nice feature. But for my money, I'm going to use that cash for things like the driver assistance systems, which again, thanks to that additional bump in processing speed, really are likely to be working extremely well with this car. So, it's so often the case with Audi. You say, yes, what a great product. And then you look to pricing and you say, but is it delivering a price point? Well, I think the nice thing about Audi is that it doesn't make any apologies at all for being the price that it is. That's not to say that it isn't very important to Audi to represent strong value for money, but it is to say that they are very keen to present the cars that they want. And they cost what they cost. So if you're making a very price-conscious purchasing decision, Audi may not necessarily be the first pick for you. But if you want a car that represents exactly what you want, you will be able to find it within the configurator at Audi. For my taste, I think this car represents a huge step forward stylistically over the predecessor. I love the interior redesign. It's much more in keeping with what I expect from an Audi, and the exterior promises all kinds of driving fun to be had. Of course, we're going to have to wait just a little bit longer to find out how well it delivers on those promises. But if what we've seen so far is anything to go by, then I'm more than a bit excited to find out. Guys, if you have any comments or questions, please pop them below. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope we'll see you all again soon.